Bill Whitey. I know about half of you here. I was your pastor for a lot of years, for a number of you. Some of us served together at Springs Ranch Church when we were in the other location with Gary and Horns and you guys. My wife and I were part of Springs Ranch and we kind of restarted years ago. I pastored Chapel Hills Baptist Church for 21 years. And I've been in this role that I am for about 9 years. Does anybody know what I do now? What?
I don't know. No, I'm kidding. We're in different churches that kind of help find stuff.
Yeah. I've had 4 titles in 9 years, so I don't even know what I'm doing. Basically, you might call me the area missionary. Hey, come on in. Right in the front row. Come on, Sri. Come on. I'm the area missionary for the Pikes Peak Baptist Association. Well, the Pikes Peak Baptist Association is a group of 55 churches in El Paso and Teller counties. And you're a part of that. Because we believe we are better together. We can do a lot more things together. We can impact the kingdom, I think, in a more healthy way. We can also penetrate the lostness that's in the Pikes Peak region. I've been back in Colorado Springs for 30 years. Some of you aren't even that old. So, my wife and I actually met here. I forgot to bring a picture of my family, but most of you know my family. I do have a new granddaughter. She was born December 10th. So my youngest daughter, Ashley, and her husband are now parents. I just love just sitting back and watching them unfold. Right, Randy? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I just kind of go, really? They're clueless. They have it all together. My wife is a nurse at Memorial Hospital Central. She does mother-baby. She's been there about 18 years. She actually got to be a part of the birthing process for all 3 of our granddaughters, actually. The other 2 were born in California, and they're 9 and 7. But once the other nurses find out what my wife does, they leave the room. They're thinking break time, because she can do this. So she gets to do all that stuff and everything. And I just sat out in the room with my other daughter, 4:30 in the morning, hanging out, you know. And so she's been a nurse for 18 and a half years there, likes doing it, loves doing it. She's sleeping right now. She works the night shift, so she worked last night. And so, then my oldest daughter, Tricia, and her husband Luke, they run a gymnastics center over on the east side. It just changed its name to Precision 501 Gymnastics at Mark Shuffle on Highway 24, down a little commercial area. It used to be Areas East, and they've kind of bought them out and all that. They have two daughters, Sydney's 9 and Lexi's 7. And they love Papa, and Papa loves them. And I wish I could have gone from being a dad to a grandpa. I mean, isn't that right? I mean, that's kind of like the best thing. I wasn't a very good dad, but I'm a good grandpa, I think. You know? And then Ashley, my youngest daughter, she's also a nurse, neonatal nurse at Memorial Central. And since she just got married a year ago, September, having a baby, she also decided to go to nurse practitioner school. Because she can do it all. Ask her. If you've ever been around her, she's just kind of that way. And her poor husband, Adam, pray for him. I was talking to Rainey about your daughter had some car issues, you know, the other day, and I'm so glad I don't have to worry about that anymore. Yeah, pass them off to that guy. You know, she's yours. I have some history with some of you, and so in my role, I get to speak at all of our different churches, get to help start churches in new ways, get to help churches kind of go through revitalization processes as well. Do a lot of leadership coaching, kind of consulting, strategic planning consulting, that kind of thing. And so I'm having a blast. I love what I'm doing. I just hope they keep sending the checks, regardless of what they call me. Just send me the checks. How many of you like to be surprised? Okay, 2 of us? 3, 4? Okay, 4 or 5 of us. All right. I love surprises. But you know what I like most? I love surprising other people. Right? I always try to surprise my wife. One year at Christmas, she was trying to surprise me, and I'm one of those that I will unwrap gifts secretly, 5 o'clock in the morning, because she's not up. You know, I'll retake them, and I'm just really, really bad. No idea. Don't even think about that. And so she hides them now. She doesn't put them on the tree. Well, one year we're done unwrapping gifts, and some of you know Carol, we're done unwrapping gifts, and now she goes, "Oh, I forgot one!" So she runs off to another part of the house, puts it in a brown paper bag, because that's all she could find, staples it up and brings it in, right? So every year now we have a gift in a brown paper bag. That's kind of become our tradition. You know, we always get sitting there, we know it's there, but it's just kind of a new thing. Well, this last year I forgot one. I never forget. And I did. And so we're also in the middle of remodeling our kitchen. And so we didn't even put up Christmas decorations this year, because I was doing demo work the week before Christmas and tearing out walls and tearing out cabinets and tearing out sinks. And so we've been kind of living in the basement of our house, and it's just been kind of crazy. So that was my excuse. I love surprises. Kids love surprises. My granddaughters, they love surprises. When Papa comes and he brings those oatmeal cranberry cookies, they love me. They just say, "Wake up, Papa, will you surprise me, surprise me." You know, as adults, I think we lose some of that. I think sometimes we lose that desire to be surprised. And yet, I think He loves to surprise us. When you look at the character of God throughout the Bible, He has a way of surprising people. And even in the life of Jesus, Jesus loved to interrupt people. And how many times was Jesus interrupted? Right? Well, this morning we're going to look at a passage that I think highlights this idea of interruption and being surprised. One of the things I love about living in Colorado Springs is the weather always changes. I know the Northeast is getting blasted. You know, not yesterday, it was like 60 degrees here. I'm still remodeling my kitchen, by the way. I was hauling stuff out. I was going, "Man, this is really nice. I think I'll just hang out here with the dogs for a while, you know." And then somebody said, "Yeah, the Northeast, I get it." But I don't know that I've ever lived in any place, and I grew up all over the world. My dad was a fighter pilot in the Air Force. I was born at Langley Air Force Base back in Hampton, Virginia, and lived all over the world. I don't know if I've ever lived any place where the weather changes so fast. And they said it has to do with the mountains and the fronts coming in and so forth. But I like it's supposed to snow tonight, right? I live out in Black Forest, so it always snows out there. I got a foot of snow. So I like the surprises of change. I had a friend of mine who was a meteorologist here in Colorado Springs. And one of the things he said is, in Colorado Springs, because of the way the systems come through here, you can really only know about 12 hours ahead. You know, the 7-day forecast, that's just pure guess. And have you noticed recently that the meteorologists on television are going, "Well, one computer model says this, and another," have you recently, I've been picking up on it. "So we're going to kind of put them together and see what happens." Here it changes very, very fast. And there's a friend of mine who is a meteorologist. I said, "All right, so I got a question for you. What's the difference between partly cloudy and partly sunny?" You ever think about that? So I think about these things. I sit there going, And he said it's perspective. I went, okay, I can live with that, right? I mean, life is kind of a lot like that. In fact, in the middle of the word life are two letters. What do they spell? If. Yeah, if. Life is full of ifs. And we don't know. And yet we want to know. There's no saying that if only ifs and buts were berries and nuts, what a wonderful life it would be. I often say even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. Every once in a while I get it, right? Well, in Luke chapter 10, we see a very familiar story. It's probably, if you've been in the church culture, you're familiar with this story. It's called the Good Samaritan. Even a lot of people who are outside the church culture are familiar sort of with this story. In Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 30, Jesus tells a story. And he says, "A man was going down from Jerusalem in Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Now, we don't know if this was an actual story, an actual event, or if it was a parable. We don't know. Normally, when Jesus uses a parable, he says, this is a parable. In this case, it doesn't say that. Now, the road from Jerusalem to Jericho was a very dangerous road. Historically, we know that. And so the temple workers, like a Levite and a Pharisee, would use that road to commute, to go home. And so you would think that the Jews and the Romans would be able to maintain the safety of a road. But obviously it wasn't a priority to them. And so this was a very dangerous place. And so there on the outline, I want to look at 4 people today. 4 people whose lives were interrupted. 4 people who had a surprise, if you will. The first person is the victim. Now this truly is a victim, okay? He was robbed, he was beaten, he was stripped of his clothing, he was left for dead, he was abandoned, he was helpless, hopeless. Unless somebody put aside their agenda for that day, he had no hope. He was going to die. Now, unless somebody was willing to get off their donkey and help this guy, he couldn't help himself. This certainly was an unwelcome interruption. Now in verse 31, we're introduced to a priest. A priest happened to be going down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side of the road. Now folks, these roads were not like I-25. They were probably about the width of half of this room. So passing by on the other side wasn't a real big deal. He could still see what was going on. But why would a priest not help this man? Why would he pass by on the other side? Why would he choose not to get off his donkey? Well, perhaps, who was a priest? Well, the priest performed the religious duties in the temple. He'd been serving God all week. Obviously, he was anxious to get home. May have been running late. We don't know. But he had been doing sacred things, and he may have thought, well, this is a busy road. Surely someone else will come by to help this guy. You ever pass somebody with a flat tire? And you thought, somebody else will stop. Or you're really thankful when somebody else has already stopped? Okay. And by the way, if you have car problems, do not call me. My mechanic would say, Bill, don't try to fix it. David and I had this conversation many, many times. Just bring it in because it'll be cheaper. Because you're going to mess something else up. Now, I can help you with a flat tire and that's about it. All right? So, this guy, for whatever reason, he chooses not to stop. He chooses not to be interrupted. Maybe he was just tired and needed to get home. Right? And not only that, for a priest and a Levite to touch a dead body was a major inconvenience. That means they had to go 30 days without working in the temple. I don't know if they got unemployment or not during that time, but they could not do their job. The Leviticus said you can't touch a dead body and do that. So maybe he was thinking, I don't want to go through that, because that's a 30-day investment, right? The third person is a Levite, verse 32. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Now why would a Levite not help this guy? He too passes by. He too chooses to not get off his donkey. Well, who's a Levite? What do they do? Well, the Levites cared for the manual needs and the manual duties of the temple. They were the ones who made sure all the lamps had oil. They were the ones who made sure things were put back in place and were cleaned up and so forth. And perhaps this guy was afraid that, you know what? This man's been robbed. They may just be using him as a lure. And if I stop and help, they're going to rob me. So I'm going to keep moving, right? Why take a chance? After all, does not God punish the guilty? Sometimes in our religious cultures, we kind of rationalize that. And maybe it's sin in their life. That's why God's getting them. And he may have thought that. He too, if he had touched him, would have been unclean for 30 days. And would not have been able to do his job. It's interesting to me, though, that here a priest and a Levite valued the duties of serving God's temple more than they valued the duties of serving God's people, God's children. And how often it is, I think, sometimes we can get wrapped up in the church thing and lose sight of what life is really about. It's the people, stupid. It really is the people. Now, oftentimes, our religious prejudice and bias can kind of make it easy for us to dismiss responsibility. Well, we could think, you know what? If that guy had not been so foolish to travel alone, this wouldn't happen. I mean, everybody knows you need to travel in caravans. You know, if he'd taken a self-defense class, if I stop and help him, will I be, enabling him to continue this lifestyle? It's amazing what we in the religious culture can think of on why not to help somebody. Why not to get off our donkeys? Now, the fourth guy. Verse 33. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. A Samaritan saw something. He was willing to open his eyes to see reality. Took pity on him. And then he went to him. In other words, he got off his donkey. He was willing to move to the other side of the road. Why would this guy help? The Jews and Samaritans hated each other. They despised each other. One of the things I'm learning working in our Hispanic culture in our city is that all Hispanics do not get along. I thought we could just all put them in one church together and it'd all be great. They have like 500-600 year histories of war and pain and hate that I was pretty clueless to. Well, that's what you have here. You have a situation of thousands of years of people who hated each other. And so this Samaritan, he loved someone who hated him. And he risked his own life. Because again, those robbers may still have been there. We don't know. And then not only did he risk his life, he spent his money, 2 days' wages. And as far as we know, he was not honored for what he did. And yet a Samaritan, which when Jesus used a Samaritan, totally disarmed his audience. They just went, whoa! I have a feeling there was a little bit more discussion at that point going, can we go back to that? Excuse me? And so here was a guy who had no reason to get off his donkey and help this guy, but he did. Now look at verse 37. Or verse 36. Jesus says, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the expert in the law said, the one who had mercy on him. The Samaritan had mercy on this guy. He identified the needs of a complete stranger. He engaged him with compassion. And then, in order to serve him well, got off his donkey, let him ride the donkey, got him to an inn, and took care of him. Now back in verse 33 it says, he took pity. Literally, you know what that means? His heart was moved. His heart was moved. When was the last time your heart was moved? When was the last time my heart was moved? When was the last time we allowed the Holy Spirit of God to move in us and through us to help us do something we were not planning on doing? When was the last time we embraced an interruption? The surprises of life often happen in the interruption. As I talk with many pastors and people all over our city, oftentimes I'll say, so Caleb, how was your day? And, man, it was really busy and it was full of interruptions. If it weren't for the interruptions, I would have had a great day. You ever felt that way? You got your to-do list, and then everybody keeps calling you, especially as the commander of a base, right, Gary? I mean, like, really? This can't, really? Sorry, have you ever thought that God's in the interruption? Maybe not in our to-do list. Now, I love making a list. I'm a list guy. But as I've remodeled my kitchen, there's a lot of interruptions. Things that weren't supposed to be, we really thought we had mold. Thankfully we didn't. But, oh, dude. And leaving without a kitchen sink for 2.5 weeks is a challenge. And we just got it in yesterday, so we're feeling better. For Friday. Do we embrace the interruptions? Jesus oftentimes interrupted people's lives. And I think sometimes he wants to interrupt ours. And the priest and Levite, they lost the opportunity because of their indifference to learn something I think God wanted to teach them. I think something that the Samaritan learned. They lost the opportunity to be surprised. To be surprised by the grace of God. Now we don't know whatever happened to this guy. We don't really ever know what happened to the Samaritan. I often wonder if they connected later on. You know? Because he was going to pass by that inn again. And so he would have had some connection with him. I think they also lost the privilege of being a steward of God's resources. What's the greatest resource God gives us? Time. Time to spend with people. Time to engage people. Time to invest in people. And to have our hearts moved, like it said in verse 37, who had mercy on him. And then Jesus says, at the last part of verse 37, go and do likewise. Now, the tense of that word in the original Greek is an imperative, which means it's supposed to be a habitual practice. It's something we're supposed to do all the time. Not just on Sunday, not just when we have a work day at the church, not just whenever, but we need to get off our donkeys every day. Now, why did Jesus tell this story? Let's go back to verse 25. You need to understand the context of this story. On verse 25, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, this guy was an expert. He was like a lawyer, an expert in the law. He was a religious scholar. And so, this question he asked was a pretty normal question, by the way. He was a specialist in the interpretation of the Old Testament, the Jewish and the Jewish religious law. And this particular question was pretty common. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Because that's where their focus was. Now, Jesus says in verse 26, what is written in the law? How do you read it? Jesus starts right where this guy is, right? What is it that you already know? And so here's what the expert says. Verse 37. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your might. And love your neighbor as yourself. You might feel kind of good about that. I know that. I know the answer to that. I know that one, right? I got that one. And he gives the right answer. Now Jesus says in verse 28, okay, you've answered correctly. Woo! Do this and you will live. Now, up to this point, nothing they've talked about was new to each other. They both knew this. It was almost like they were kind of positioning themselves for the debate that's coming, right? I mean, they both already knew this information. And so there was nothing that had surfaced that was unusual. And then the expert tries to confuse Jesus. Verse 29. Then who is my neighbor? He wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? Where are the loopholes in the deal? Who can I count as a neighbor? Who do I not have to worry about? You know, within 3 houses? Is that it? How about one on each side, one across the street, one I got 4, I got that covered. The person I worked with, but not the person who I don't like. Who is my neighbor? That's the question he asked. Where are the loopholes? You see, he's trying to justify his own prejudicial perspective. He's trying to justify his own mind. Because that's what it says, right? He wanted to justify himself. He wanted to figure out who was worthy to be my neighbor. He wasn't Mr. Rogers, obviously. All right? Who is worthy to qualify to be my neighbor? So Jesus interrupts his life. Interrupts his agenda. Interrupts his perspective. And this guy's now faced with a life moment. And you may be facing a life moment today. A life moment is when we come face to face with a new truth, or an old truth that we kind of had shoved away resurfaces, and we have to deal with some stuff we don't want to deal with. And in a very real way, Jesus confronts this guy with a life moment. He may be confronting you, he may be confronting me as well. He may say, you know what? I want you to live a new normal. And I want you to begin to get off your donkey and begin to serve people who have needs that are greater than yours. Verse 37 again. The expert in the law said, okay, the man who had mercy on him, that's the one who's a good neighbor, right? Which guy was a neighbor? And he says, then go and do likewise. Now, to the thieves, this Jew was a victim to be exploited. And so they did. To the priest and the Levite, this person was an inconvenience to avoid and ignore, which they did. To the Samaritan, he was a neighbor to love and to help. So he did. He got off his donkey. Have you ever faced that kind of moment? It may have been a really small thing. It may have been a major interruption in your life. When you have to come to grips with, okay, am I willing to love this person in spite of themselves? You ever come to that moment when it's a surprise, but it's also an opportunity? I remember 9 years ago, I was approached to take this job by a number of pastors in our city. And after I got done laughing, because I was pastoring a great church, we were having a great time, and nobody wants to be a denominational worker. That's what I am. I work for a denomination. None of us went to seminary going, I want to be a denominational worker. Doesn't happen. And I have 3 bosses, which is really interesting as well. And yet, God decided to interrupt my life. He said, Bill, I've got a bigger portrait for you to paint on. That's what one of my deacons told me. I'll never forget that. He said, Bill, you're going to be able to look at the whole city now, not just one church. He said, you always talk about the city, so it really fits. Is God interrupting you right now? Saying, I think I got something for you. You've been pushing back on this for a bit. But I want you to get off your donkey and see what only I can do. In order for that to happen, we need to be willing to risk and trust God in the midst of it. As I said, in the last 9 years, I've had 4 titles. I get paychecks from like 4 different organizations. It's kind of weird. And they kind of keep, every couple of years it keeps changing. I'm looking at Clay because he's lived this with me for the last 7 or 8 years. Every 6 months there's a new thing. It's not real secure. But my wife has a good job, so I'm good. She's more marketable than I am, so it works. But seriously, it's a little unnerving when you're not really sure. Especially as I get older, I'm not always in demand. And yet, God says, I got you right where I want you. And I want you just to keep embracing the interruptions of life that come your way. And that's okay. Let me share a couple of stories with you. At our church, where Carol and I go now, I shared this sermon, and I had a lady who was in her 80s, late 70s, early 80s. Her and her husband, Norm and Nancy. They just live in Colorado. They just live in Monument for the summer, and then they go back to Florida for the winter. And she's in our life group that we actually lead. And she came up to me, she goes, you know, I think I need to get off my donkey. I'm like, how do you even get on a donkey at your age? So she said, yeah. And I said, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'll tell you in a couple of weeks. I went, okay. She said, just pray for me. Okay, I'll pray for you. So about 3 or 4 weeks later, she comes up and she goes, you know, I know we've been helping Tony Hume, who does a mobile home ministry at Canyon Ridge Mobile Home Park on the airport. And he's got all these children. There's about 2,000 people that live in the Canyon Ridge Mobile Home Park. And Tony Hume is a Korean guy who speaks Spanish. Don't even ask. And this is how God just kind of networks stuff. It's just kind of crazy when you get these stories all over our city. So he's working in this mobile home park, and he takes his Korean students with him. And the kids need hats, the little toboggan hats. Is that what you call? We call those, Clay? Beanies. Okay, there you go. I wasn't sure we called them anything. Well, she made 50 of those hats at 3 hours a pop, and gave them out to those kids. And the pictures we got of those kids with those beanies on was so cool. And a couple of them, I was there when they passed them out, a couple of them said, boy, my head's going to be really warm this year. I'm really thankful for that, because this is back right before Thanksgiving. Now guys, that's not a big deal, is it? I mean, it's really not that big of a deal. Well, I mean, 3 times 50 is a lot of time. But, I mean, she didn't go out and spend thousands of dollars, or, you know, she just got off her donkey. She was willing to say, okay, God, I have this talent, I can do this. In fact, she didn't even get to see the pictures till after she went back to Florida, so we had to send them to her. And then all the kids signed a card thanking her for it. And so I'm looking forward when she comes back in April, just to kind of see if she wants to do that again. Maybe something this summer, who knows. God wants you and I to do that, to get off of our donkeys and begin to serve the people around us. And again, it doesn't have to be real expensive, it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but just a willingness to have spiritual eyes to see. My youngest daughter, Ashley, which some of you know, she is the strong-willed child. When she was small, we read Dobson's book. Did us no good. But we were smart enough to have a hardback copy. And that hardback copy, strategically placed, was helpful. I just pray Addie is our strong-willed child. I already got an accent. Anyway. So Ashley's been dating this guy named Adam. My daughter was in her mid-20s, college graduate, blah, blah, blah. Dated this guy named Adam. Adam is not a Christ follower. And her mom and I are not real happy about that, and trying to figure out what to do with that. And, so my other son-in-law, Luke, says, Dad, I don't think Adam's going to go away. Because that's what I would pray. All these losers Ashley would date, she would fix these people. She would rescue these men. And I'm like, yeah, you know what I'm thinking? Did you do that? No. Okay, so she would fix these men and she would rescue them, right? And we were going, she's going to support this guy forever. And the guy she dated before Adam was a loser. I mean, mega loser. Serious loser. He was, anyway. So thankful they broke up. So she's dating. Adam's actually a good guy. He actually has a full-time job with USAA. Actually has a college degree. I mean, this is a step up from what we're used to. And so Luke says, well, Dad, I think we need to start praying for Adam. I said, no, I just keep praying that he goes away. I don't think he's going to go away. If you look at my journal, I have all these go away. Just, you know, I just put A, go away. B, go away. And so I said, okay. So I decided, if this guy's not going to leave, I'm going to start meeting with him. And we're going to start having some spiritual discussions. Because if you're coming into this house, in this family, there's going to be a spiritual element to it. Whether you like it or not, homeboy. But we're going to have that discussion right now. And so we met. He was open to meeting. And so we met for a couple hours one Saturday morning for breakfast. Had a great conversation. Shared Jesus with him. He grew up nominal Catholic. Grew up in Monument. Told him about Christmas and Easter. You know, I even went for the ask. Is there any reason why you would not want to say yes to Jesus and invite Jesus to come into your heart? I'm just going for it. Whether I talk to this guy anymore or not. So he says, no, I don't think I'm ready to do that. But he said, thank you so much, and I would love to continue this conversation because I never connected Christmas and Easter. It makes a lot more sense. But this is not a guy from Zimbabwe. This is a kid who grew up here and didn't make that connection. So I continued to let him interrupt my life. And we met every month for a few months. And then in April, he calls me and says, hey, can we get together for breakfast? I've got some questions for you. And their relationship has elevated by then. And I know what one of the questions are going to be. And at this stage, I'm going to have to say no. Which is not going to make my daughter very happy. And she probably will elope with this guy and I'll never see her again. She has that capacity. So we meet. And he's like, I got 3 questions for you. Luckily, he's not a morning person I am, so I'm there. He's kind of foggy. That's why my wife won't go to breakfast with me. We'll have lunch. So he said, I got 3 questions. I said, okay, go ahead. He goes, number 1, can I borrow your mountain bike on Monday? Number 2, can I have permission to ask your daughter to marry me? And number 3, can you teach me more about God? Number 1, yes. You can borrow my mountain bike on Monday. Now let's talk about number 3. Because I wanted to make sure he knew this wasn't like a deal. We're cutting a deal here. And so in about 20 minutes, he accepts Christ. The Holy Spirit God was just so in on that. Carol was home praying. She actually was up home praying. Because I told her, I said, I'm leaving, you better pray. And I mean, he just embraced Jesus, and God just changed his life, which made the answer number 2 a lot easier. And I've had the privilege over the last year and a half to disciple him. We meet every month, and I get to meet with both my son-in-laws and get to do life with these young men, and I'm blessed. I'm really, really blessed. And then to see him grow through that, and he doesn't come out of a Christian home. He has 4 other brothers, and they're all pretty out there, and his parents are pretty out there, and so we're trying to network with them, and maybe that's our new mission field, is his family. And I told him, I said, you're a missionary to your family now. And so he's kind of embraced that. And I say all that to say I was willing to let God interrupt my life. I was willing to get off my donkey and go, okay, I don't know anything about this young man, but I'm going to go there. We're going to see what happens. And then God just opened up the floodgates of blessing on our lives. And it's so neat to watch him grow spiritually. And now even he and Lou together, the 3 of us get to meet and have spiritual conversations. And my other son-in-law was actually an elder at one of our partnering churches in the city. And it's neat to see him rise up and be in that kind of a leadership role. And, a lot of people ask me, so what was the deal with the mountain bike? So I'll answer that for you. On Monday, he had set up to ask Ashley to marry him on a mountain bike ride, because that was their first date. Oh. Guy didn't own a mountain bike, though. He borrows mine. We should have told Ashley something. But, so he had it set up where they were going to go down this trail, the same trail their first date was on, or Red Rocks. And so one of his brothers was 5 minutes down the trail with Cameron. He thought, well, 5 minutes, she won't get the helmet hair too bad, and, won't be sweaty or anything, right? He's really thinking ahead on this thing. And so they get to the trailhead, and Ashley wants to go a different way.
Women.
Well, this one woman. So they get in an argument. So what do you think she does? She takes off the way she wants to go. Well, bless his heart, he had to follow her. 20 minutes later, they end up where he wanted to be. And his brother's going, where you been? I've been waiting here for 20 minutes. So then Ashley's like, oh. Of course, she didn't care about the helmet hair anyway, so they get engaged. It's all cool. But the funniest part is they come back and tell us the story with our other family there, and my other son-in-law, Luke, goes, Adam, welcome to the family. They're all like that. So we all tend to be that way. Which means for God to interrupt my life And for me to get off my donkey is challenging. So I'm a fellow struggler with you. I want you to hear me say that. Because I kind of have my life planned out. I have every day kind of planned out. And, but I'm learning more and more to embrace the interruptions of life. And I want to challenge you today. I want to encourage you today to do the same. When God gives you opportunity, get off your donkey and serve Him and serve His children. I think one of the greatest things we can do in worship is by serving other people. I love to serve other people, whether it's through disaster relief. We live in Black Forest. Our house survived the Black Forest fire. It came within a quarter of a mile of our house. That summer, I cut down more burnt black ponderosa pines than I ever cut down in my life. But I can't tell you how many times people would say, why are you doing this? Well, because Jesus loves you and so do we. No, really, really. Are you like doing community service? I don't know if I had that look. With the helmet on, I don't know. No, really. Can we pay you? No, you can't pay us. We just want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. I cut down thousands of trees over the last 2 summers by serving people. And when you go through the ash of a 3-story house, there's about 3 feet of ash in the basement. And you go through all this ash using these little wire boxes, and you shake it out over wheelbarrows, and you hope to find something of value. And the homeowners will tell you what to look for. And every once in a while you get to find something. And we put it aside, because they're not usually there, they come back later, and let them decide. I've wept with people over what we found. I've prayed with people, because we were willing to get off our donkeys and serve some people. I pray you'll think about doing that. Individually, as a church, you begin to look at areas that God opens up, and you'll embrace those interruptions that God brings into your life. I'm going to pray for us. We're going to take our offering, I think, as well.